History Inside a Nutshell, the show where we sail into our port of call discussing maritime history.
On the 15th of April 1912, a little after 4 a.m, the Cunard ship Carpathia spotted a pale green glow. In the distance, Captain Arthur Rostron saw a small, tiny lifeboat floating in the ocean. He couldn't believe his eyes, and once he saw the boat, he knew that the lifeboat from the newly designed ship, the Titanic, had sunken below the ocean. Although she was reported to be the furthest away from the White Star liner, it took the Carpathia 4 hours to reach the recorded position of the Titanic's final location. But there was a ship that was the furthest away from Titanic and the Carpathia, the RMS Olympic. The Olympic, who was Titanic's sister ship, was returning to Southampton from New York when she received the news. And like the other ships, who were coming to Titanic's aid or standing by, the Olympic raced as fast as she could while attempting to communicate with her sister ship. The Olympic never made it to save the Titanic, but if she did, would she have been able to rescue the Titanic's surviving passengers and crew in time? Well, no. However, 3 men fought against all odds to sail towards the Titanic. In this video, we are going to touch on the 3 men who sailed aboard the Olympic and their actions on the 15th of April 1912. The story starts with the Olympic's departure from New York City, which occurred on Saturday, 13th of April 1912. She left at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. On the White Star liner, passengers were talking about the Titanic. She had been the talk of the ocean, but what should have been her first would become Titanic's only voyage and one she would never finish. At 11:40 p.m. the following night, the Titanic struck an iceberg in the cold Atlantic Ocean. On board the Olympic, 3 men would play a role in the rescue attempt to save the Titanic. They were Captain James Herbert Haddock and 2 wireless operators, Ernest James Moore and Albert Bagot. Captain Haddock had connections with White Star Line and the captains and crew who worked with the company. Interestingly, he was supposed to be the captain of the Titanic for her maiden voyage, but as we all know, Captain Edward J. Smith would be assigned to the Titanic. The 2 operators also knew most of the Titanic's crew, Marconi operators and captain. The pair was also originally supposed to go, but Moore came down with a cold, leading to a decision to appoint Harold Bride and Jack Phillips instead. All was plain sailing until 12:55 a.m. on the 15th of April, when Moore heard a CQD message from Phillips. In the CQD sent from Titanic's Marconi apparatus, Moore learned that the Titanic had struck an iceberg and was sinking. Although they weren't the first ships to receive the Marconi wireless set, the Olympic and Titanic had the latest technology. Operated by employees from the Marconi company, the ship's Marconi Marine 5 kW wireless transmitting set had 2 operation frequencies, which were 1 MHz and 500 MHz. Both sets on the sister ships had different daytime and nighttime ranges, with an emergency radio provision designed for an 80-mile range. On the night of the disaster, Olympic and Titanic's range would have a 2,000-mile range. The Rangers and Marconi apparatus would play their parts in the disaster, though it resulted in confusion and tragedy. Receiving the message from Phillips, Moore alerted Bagot before he rushed to the bridge, where he handed Captain Haddock an envelope which contained the telegram. When he read it, Captain Haddock knew that instead of CQD, the Titanic was sending SOS messages. Once he read it, he told Bagot, "I'll answer it myself," and on a message pad he replied to Captain Smith, "I am lighting up all possible boilers as fast as I can." However, Moore claimed that the atmospherics and other stations were jamming. The reason for this was that while the Titanic was sending CQD and SOS messages, all of the ship's machines were communicating at the same time. In the end, Cape Race told all ships to stop talking to avoid further jams. Haddock then immediately changed course, heading to Titanic's aid. Upon changing their course, Moore and Bagot switched the Olympic's range, attempting to get a better signal. While Moore and Bagot continued communicating, Captain Haddock ordered to increase the Olympic's speed. However, there was one problem. The Olympic was 505 nautical miles away from the Titanic's recorded position. In the distance between the two sisters, and if the Olympic reached the Titanic, it would take her 6 hours and 10 minutes, 2 hours more than the Carpathia. Despite the travel distances between the two sisters, the Olympic's crew did everything they could to get everything ready. On the deck, the sailors had rushed to prepare the lifeboats. The firemen had lit all of the Olympic's 29 boilers, and the engineers increased the speed of the reciprocating engines to over 80 RPM, with the top speed reaching 25 knots an hour. During the rush, some officers would visit the wireless room, asking Moore and Bagot if there was further news about the Titanic, and every visit the two wireless operators gave the same reply: "We've lost touch." It wasn't just the Olympic who had lost touch with the Titanic. Ships like the Carpathia, Baltic, and Cape Race noticed that the Titanic's signal and power were declining. Phillips had turned on the emergency setting, but since the water had already risen in her engine room, it became clear that the Titanic wouldn't survive the night. The last message the Olympic got from the Titanic was at 1:57 a.m. When Moore picked up the message, the station at Cape Race had lost the Titanic's signal. Moore and Bagot made further contact with the other ships nearby, but all said that after 2 a.m. the Titanic's power was weakening or had gone. The Titanic lost its power at around 2:10 a.m. Although the Titanic sank at 2:20 a.m, the Olympic continued to race on. When the Olympic was 100 nautical miles away from the scene, Captain Haddock received a message from the Carpathia's operator, Harold Cottam, that the Titanic sank with an additional note. All boats accounted for, about 675 souls saved. Having learnt the news, Captain Haddock asked Moore to send a message to the Carpathia, as they wanted to offer to take on survivors. At the time, she was still about 100 miles from the scene. Once they sent the offer, Captain Rostron, under orders from the White Star Line chairman J. Bruce Ismay, refused. The reason for this refusal was that Ismay was concerned about how the survivors would be traumatized from seeing the Olympic, for they might see her as a virtual mirror image of the Titanic. Captain Haddock ordered to resume Olympic's course to Southampton. However, the Olympic continued contact with the Carpathia, as Captain Haddock asked for a list of names of survivors were passed to Cape Race. On 17th of April, Gordon Bennett, owner of the New York Herald, sent a telegram to the Olympic asking for news about the disaster. The New York Herald then offered to pay $150 per column for anyone for information about the Titanic. Captain Haddock maintained a strict blackout on all news out of respect. When the Olympic arrived at Southampton, Captain Haddock summoned Moore and Bagot to his cabin to thank them for all they could. For their actions, the Marconi Company presented Moore with an engraved gold watch, while Bagot was given a double rise in pay. In the British inquiry into the disaster, Bagot was interviewed about the Marconi apparatus. He also showed Lord Mersey the Olympic's Marconi apparatus. While being interviewed, Bagot demonstrated how the apparatus worked, and made contact with the French station at Cape Ushant. In the United States inquiry, Captain Haddock was interviewed by Senator Smith. The Olympic was involved in both inquiries, where there were inspections on her lifeboats, watertight doors and bulkheads. She even had sea tests performed for the British inquiry to understand the crew's actions, speed and timing of the Titanic's collision. However, the Olympic became involved in union strikes when firemen and crewmen disagreed about a new set of collapsible lifeboats that were not seaworthy. The 40 lifeboats were hesitantly transferred from troop ships, and they requested they should be replaced by wooden lifeboats instead. The strike increased into a deputation when it was discovered that one boat was unseaworthy. As a result, All the sailors were arrested and charged with mutiny. By May 1912, all charges were dropped and lifeboats were increased. In October, the Olympic was refitted with extra davits, an inner watertight skin with a double hull, and the extension of the watertight bulkheads from E deck to B deck. Although the heroic actions of Captain Haddock, his crew, and the 2 Marconi operators were sources of bravery, there has been speculation about how the Olympic could have saved the Titanic. The travel distance gives a clear answer to this, but when it comes to the opposite side, the opinion divides. If the Olympic had been closer, there might have been a chance that, like the Carpathia, the crew and the captain would already have her lifeboats ready to collect either all or half the Titanic's crew and passengers and take them on board. If the Titanic had sunk while she was on the scene, then the Olympic's 14 regulation boats, 4 collapsible boats, and 2 emergency cutters could have saved an estimate of over 1,000 people. However, considering the timing of the sinking, the Titanic would still leave an estimated 33.33% casualties, a quarter less than the original number of the passengers and crew who died that night. The heroic actions of Captain Haddock, Ernest Moore, and Albert Bagot have been forgotten in recent times, but like Captain Arthur Roston and Harold Cottam, these 3 brave men too sacrificed the lives of their crew and passengers to hurry to the Titanic's aid. If history had been different, and if the Olympic had been nearby, there would have been a chance that extra lives could have been saved. But we shouldn't play the blame game here, because the men did everything they could. The rescue attempt didn't end in vain because now we have 3 additional men who played a role in the Titanic disaster. Their story should be told, and retelling it was a good choice. This video is a dedication to them, and the RMS Olympic too. We salute you all.
I would like to thank my friend Barry from Airy Barry True Crime for narrating this video, as well as being a regular narrator on the History Inside of a Nutshell channel. Barry runs a crime channel talking about the recent murder mysteries and the mysterious disappearances of people who have gone missing. She's also done a video on the gunpowder plot from last year. If you want to find Barry's channel, a link will be in the description box down below and in the card above. Also, if you would like to know more about the story, there is an article on Encyclopedia Titanica that is written by Bagot's own words. This is based from a book he wrote called Roaming Around, and even though it is part of his autobiography, I can guarantee you it is highly recommended that you should read it. I will leave a link to it in the description box down below. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe for future videos. Until next time, this has been History Inside a Nutshell, departing from the dogs. Thank you so much for all of your support and enjoy the rest of your voyage.